All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us again after our welcoming session. This is session one of the research presentations for our conference on agricultural policy, economics, and diverse farms and farmers. This first set of research presentations will focus on diversity and participation in U.S. government programs. Each presenter will have between 15 and 20 minutes to present. And following all four presentations, we will have a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit any questions or comments you may have through the Q&A tool in the attendee interface. And so with that, I will pass off the floor to our first speaker, Cesar Escalante.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Cesar Escalante. I'm a professor of agricultural finance from the University of Georgia. The research that I'm going to present to you this morning is the title of it is Loan Packaging Decisions for Beginning Minority Farm Borrowers, a recent study that I completed along with a former student of mine, Peng Hui Gao, and a colleague of mine at the University of Georgia, William Secor. Let me just give you a background on the motivation for our study. This actually derives its motivation from the racial, ethnic, gender bias allegations in farm lending, which has actually been an issue that has been plaguing the USDA, as the USDA has been the defendant in many lawsuits filed by farmers alleging racial and gender discrimination in their farm lending decisions of the Farm Service Agency, which is the government's lending arm to the farm sector. You probably have heard about one of the most popular lawsuits, the Pigford versus Glickman case in 1997, where African-American farmers were able to successfully elevate their individual lawsuits to class action status. After that, or even around that time, there were a lot of lawsuits also coming from individual and class action lawsuits coming from other minority farmers, like lawsuits from the Native American farmers, Hispanic American farmers, women farmers, and even lawsuits from the white farmers who sued the USDA for reverse discrimination. According to these civil cases and based on numerous anecdotal evidence, discrimination in farm lending can actually occur at several phases of the loan application and approval process. At the loan inquiry stage, they allege that there's already some discrimination there, even at the point where somebody makes a phone call and the person calling this person's accent or name would already give away his or her racial or ethnic and gender attribute or affiliation. And right there and then, they would already be discouraged from filing their application. For those who are able to successfully reach the point where they're able to meet face-to-face with the lending officer, the anecdotal evidence, the allegation was that after they leave the office, they actually think or they believe that their loan application materials would just end up in the wastebasket. There's also discrimination, of course, at the loan evaluation stage, where the contention is that minority farmers, especially African-American farmers, would usually experience high rejection rates. And they would actually are made to wait much, much longer, significantly longer waiting period for them during the processing of their loan applications. And then, even if farmers are able to successfully get their loan applications approved, they further allege that in the packaging of the loan terms, the terms of their their approved loan applications, there's also some discrimination there. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. I want to give credit and I want to be fair with the FSA, because over the years, especially after the late 1990s, with all those commotion about all these big cases coming up, FSA has actually actively and aggressively launched reforms. And among these reforms that they instituted were the requirement of having their staff undergo some personal ethics and valuation training programs, and also some changes in their loan processing procedures for more transparency, and also to to have more objectivity, which is actually the solution for the allegations of subjectivism. And also they made some efforts to make sure that their loan committees are more diverse and would have greater representation. This research would focus on the loan evaluation stage, and would look at loan packaging decisions. And we're going to introduce two potential sources of complications in the decision-making process. First, of course, we're going to talk about the racial, ethnic, and gender factor, as we will be dealing with minority farmers. But in addition to that, we're going to also be looking at beginning farmers, because of the fact that the lack of business experience or track record could also enter into the loan, could also influence the loan packaging decisions. We're going to be looking at three loan packaging terms, or the three components of the loan package. And we're going to be looking at loan amount, loan pricing, interest rate, and loan maturity, or the repayment term, repayment period. Our analysis is going to use some direct loan data from the FSA. And we employed a seemingly unrelated regression modeling technique, which actually involves a system of equations whereby we were able to define separate estimating equations for the three components of the loan package: loan amount, loan interest rate, and loan maturity. So these are the equations, and these three equations would actually include a number of categories, variable categories. One category would be a variable, the borrower variable category that would actually capture demographic attributes. We also have another category called farm, which would include business financial performance variables. Then we have some dummy variables for the program types and for the loan category, and also environment category for environmental variables to capture some macroeconomic and non-economic factors like weather. Before discussing the regression results, let us first look at the mean financial performance profiles of the various racial, ethnic, and gender categories of our beginning farmer borrowers. In this summary, I would like to call your attention to two columns. First, the column for the white farmers, because we're going to use that as a reference group for understanding or comparing the results for the other racial and ethnic groups. And also when we make gender comparisons, we're going to use the male column as the reference column. Okay, so according to the summary here, hold on. Let me just, okay, according to the summary here, African-American farmers, as well as American Indian farmers, would have significantly smaller operations compared to the white farmers. As you can see, in terms of when their business size is measured in terms of gross revenue and total assets, their numbers are actually significantly smaller than those of the white farmers. And also they're significantly less profitable. As you can see that their net income levels are significantly lower, statistically significantly lower than the net income of white farmers. In our gender comparisons, we see female farmers also having the same result: significantly smaller operations and significantly less profitable operations. All right. At this point, so we're all going to be on the same page. We are going to look at loan packaging from two perspectives. Let's take the borrower's perspective first. Okay, so we answered the question: if you're a borrower, what would be a favorable loan package for you? What would be your ideal or your desired loan package? Well, every borrower would always want to have their loan amount, their requested loan amount, to be fully approved, that they would really be able to receive the full amount that they applied for, and then they would also hope for the lowest possible interest rate that they could ever get. And then when you combine that with repayment term, they aspire for, or they hope for, a longer repayment term, such that the combination of low interest rate and longer repayment term will end up will have them experiencing more affordable loan loan payments, periodic or regular loan payments. So combination of lower interest rate and longer repayment term would be ideal for them, and their loan amount fully granted to them. But when we look at this three loan packaging terms from the lender's perspective, then it's a different story. Every lender would always have credit risk management consideration in mind when they're making loan packaging decisions, including FSA, because we should clarify the fact that when we're dealing with FSA loans, loans are not dole-outs. Loans would need to be repaid. So FSA would also need to have like a risk management mindset when they're making these decisions. The issue is that, how do these lenders deal with high-risk borrowers? When you're dealing with regular lenders, non-FSA lenders, the answer is straightforward. Reject them. Do not give them a chance. But FSA cannot adopt the same stance because of its commitment to help socially disadvantaged and financially disadvantaged farmers. So FSA has actually developed some unconventional definitions for some credit risk parameters. Okay, let's look at delinquency, for instance. The way FSA defines delinquency is quite unusual or unconventional. Loan delinquency arising from conditions that are beyond the borrower's control, like illness, sudden loss of jobs, weather disturbances. FSA does not consider them as conditions for delinquency. Okay. Moreover, and this is actually some favorable feature in their lending to beginning farmers, is that FSA is quite lenient with the definition of track record. Regular lenders, non-FSA lenders, would insist on explicit, direct evidence of track record, while FSA would accept comparable or alternative evidence of past business experience. In other words, FSA compared to regular lenders would tend to lend based on potentials. Okay, and are willing to make concessions on issues that regular lenders would have a straightforward answer to, which is like reject them. So if from the FSA perspective, when they're dealing with high risk, relatively higher risk, socially and financially disadvantaged borrowers, then the tendency is always like to see if there's like a way to give them some opportunity by probably giving them a partial amount of the loan amount that's being requested, to sort of just test the waters, to give these borrowers the chance to prove themselves. And then they would also usually charge lower interest rates, and they would also prescribe the reasonable repayment term according to the financial conditions of the firm. So let us now look at then, this is the data set that we used. Let's look at now a comparison of the mean FSA loan terms for the various racial, ethnic, and gender groups. And in this table, we again focus on two specific columns as reference columns. Okay, when comparing the results for the combined racial, ethnic, gender labeled groups, our reference column would be the first column, the white male. So they would all be compared to the results for the white male. For the gender comparisons, the reference column would be the last column, which is the male borrowers. Now, according to these results, the results for our loan amount, interest rate, and loan maturity, in terms of loan amount to start with, white female, African American male operators, or the farms operated by white female and African American male operators, are significant would usually receive significantly lower loan amounts compared to the loan amount received by white males. Female borrowers would receive significantly lower loan amounts compared to their male counterparts. In terms of interest rate, farms operated by white female, Hispanic male, and American Indian male operators would receive significantly higher interest rate than the interest rate enjoyed by white male borrowers. In terms of loan maturity, we had two contrasting results. Before that, I'm sorry. Female borrowers would usually receive significantly higher interest rates compared to the rates received by their male counterparts. Then we go to loan maturity. In terms of loan maturity, African American male would actually have significantly shorter repayment periods, which is a favorable loan term. And while American Indian male farmers would receive significantly longer. Oh, no, wait a minute. The African American male shorter loan repayment period is not it's an unfavorable loan term. The longer term for American Indian male would be the favorable long term. So now we talk about the results of our econometric analysis, the seemingly unrelated regression models that I talked about. In the interest of time, I will not be able to present all of the results, but I would just like highlight some interesting results. And if ever the other results need to be recalled in the Q&A, I have some tables in the appendix for that. But anyway, here are the things that I want to emphasize as far as our results are concerned. I'd like to talk about the environmental variables results because they seem to be interesting. So first, hold on, there's like some stuff here. Okay. During periods of extreme drought, there seems to be a tendency for FSA to grant low interest rate, which is good, but they would be offset with shorter repayment term. So in times of extreme drought, FSA would actually have two terms that are actually offsetting each other. One is favorable and one is like for risk management purposes would be quite unfavorable. In contrast, during an economic recession, they tend to make loan approvals at lower amounts, and then they would combine it with charging higher interest rates, which actually are two unfavorable things from the borrower's perspective. But the good thing about this one is that there's always an offsetting term there, which is the granting of longer repayment terms, which actually is a favorable loan term. As far as the results are concerned for the racial dummy variables, the most compelling result of our study is the insignificance of the African American farmer dummy variable. In our analysis, we used beginning white farmers as the excluded category. So any result that we get for the racial, ethnic, and gender dummy variables are compared to the beginning white farmers. So in this case, what this implies is that relative to the excluded category, who are the beginning white farmers, beginning African American farmers neither enjoy preferential loan term nor are singled out to contend with conservative loan packages. In other words, they're treated in the same way as white farmer borrowers are treated. So that's favorable. That's good. The only exceptions when we looked at the racial and gender dummy variables results would be American Indian farmers who would be receiving significantly larger loan amounts compared to the beginning white farmers, and Hispanic farmers receiving higher interest rates compared to the excluded category. Well, I want to wrap this up with a couple of slides just to point out some very important implications or suggestions or ideas for moving forward with the whole goal of like building a better future or paving the way for a better treatment of minority farmers. The first of all, hold on, let me just. There's like some screen parts of the screen here that actually abstracts my view of my slide. Okay. Anyway, so first of all, we want you FSA and the government to engage and sustain to really be committed to have a sustained commitment to resolving the credit access and upholding fair and equitable lending issues. There always will be challenges and there will always be some issues that need to be resolved, and we need them to be continually committed to that. The government itself has been faithfully complying with its obligations for settlements, remunerations, and loan forgiveness. And then the lawsuits I mentioned in my introductory slide, most of them resulted in out-of-court settlements. The African American class action lawsuit, for instance, resulted in a consent decree that provided for remunerations, loan forgiveness, and other settlements for farmers who were able to prove that they were indeed discriminated against. And these efforts have cost the government billions of dollars in remunerations and loan forgiveness and other settlements. We also want FSA, we also would like to FSA to continue with the reform movement for and also monitoring and monitoring and evaluation their performance to make sure that they completely sanitize their procedures of any opportunity for subjectivity. But the reality is that even if these things are realized, even if the reforms are indeed very effective, the reality is that the credit issue is just a partial solution. It only actually addresses the tip of the iceberg. Because beyond the credit issue, the reality or the thing is that we need effective reforms and considerable attention to equity and fairness issues, not just in the area of credit, but also in other social and business aspects. If you recall, and I actually have other slides in the appendix if we have time later to talk about, if you recall, minority farmers usually have more inferior financial performance conditions. They usually are smaller, less profitable, more liquid, and insolvent operations. So the goal is that we want to increase their overall competitiveness. We want to look at the machinery, the infrastructure surrounding their farm operations that will allow them to operate businesses that are highly competitive, such that when they go to their lenders, not just with their regular and FSA lenders, we don't need those considerations for them anymore. But for them to be able to do that, they need to address all these deficiencies in their issues. And a lot of these issues that they experience are not just of their own doing, but it's because of the deficiencies in the surrounding infrastructure, the surrounding support system. So among others, the hope is to remove biases, not just in credit-related decisions, but in other areas like property rights, property acquisition, product marketing relationship with suppliers, remove biases there, and so that these farmers will become even more, will be able to operate really progressive and productive operations and efficient operations. We also want them to gain for them to have continued increased access to technical skills training and assistance, and a lot of infrastructure support from the government. So that's the message I want to share with you today. And I will be glad to answer questions during the Q&A section. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be able to share with you my research and my ideas. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. And now we will move on to our second speaker, Samantha Padilla from the Economic Research Service.
Thank you for coming to my presentation. My name is Samantha Padilla. I am a research economist, agricultural economist with USDA Economic Research Service, and this work was jointly done with Stephen Morgan, Nigel Key, and Nathan Hendricks. I will start by saying that the findings and conclusions are those of the authors and should not be construed to represent any official USDA or US policy or determination. So a little bit of background regarding the market facilitation payments, or MFP. In 2018, several countries implemented retaliatory tariffs on many products, including most U.S. agricultural products. And the export losses from the retaliatory tariffs were estimated to be somewhere between 13.5 and 18.7 billion. And in response to this, the Trump administration at the time implemented market facilitation payments. So this was to try to offset the losses from the retaliatory tariffs. And the payments were given in 2018 and 2019, and there were approximately 23 billion indirect payments to commodity producers. So the payments in 2018 and 2019 were calculated in different ways. So in 2018, MFP payments use crop-specific rates to calculate the projected loss in export value due to the tariffs. So some commodities were affected by tariffs more than others. So that the calculation of MFP in 2018 tried to get at that issue. And in 2019, there was a single county payment that was calculated as the weighted average of the commodity-specific payment, where the weights corresponded to like the historical production of the county. There were also differences in the size in terms of how much it cost. In 2018, MFP was about 8.6 billion, and in 2019, there was a 15 billion commitment. In terms of what types of farms did the payments went to, both in 2018 and 2019, about 94 to 95% of the payments went to commodity producing crops, specifically corn, soybeans, and those field crops. About only 1% in 2018, or less than 1% in 2018, went to specialty crops, and in 2019 I believe that was 2%. So the motivation of this presentation is really to look at, there have been many concerns regarding MFP payments and the distribution of these payments, whether they were counties were favored, or different types of farmers with certain characteristics were favored over others. So this is really trying to assess, using data, what do we see in terms of reported MFP payments. This work is really basing the study of the distribution of payments on Hendricks et al. In this paper, the authors look using the 2017 Census of Act data. They use the MFP formulas to calculate how much each type of farm, depending on different farmer characteristics, would be eligible to receive if MFP happened in 2017 and with 2017 production. So in this sense, we're basically calculating, or the authors are calculating, the differences among white and black producers based on that 2017 production. And doing a decomposition, the authors find that these differences in payments can be attributed to, in a large part, to farm size. So in here, we extend that analysis to look at reported MFP payments using actual data from 2018, 2019, and 2020. So the research question that we're trying to answer is, what is the distribution of reported MFP payments across different farm characteristics? And the data set that we use to try to answer this question is the Agricultural Resource Management Survey, commonly known as ARMS. And And we, through this paper, summarize market facilitation payments by race, gender, beginning farmers, and limited resource status. So a little bit of background about ARMS. So ARMS is the primary source of information on production practices and economic well-being in the U.S. So in this study, we use ARMS for 2018, 2019, and 2020. And a little bit of background about ARMS. It is a multi-phase series of interviews. So the first phase of ARMS is a screening survey where a sample of farmers are surveyed on their production practices and types of commodities that they use. And from that, the phase 2 survey gets at production practices and costs. And then phase 3 is a whole farm survey looking at farm business and farm household information. In this study, we focus on phase 3. It is a nationally represented sample of farmers, and it has characteristics on how long has the farm been in operation, or the operator been farming, whether it's a limited resource farm, race and gender of all the operators on the farm. And most importantly, from 2018 to 2020, there was a direct question asking if the farm received any market facilitation payment in that year. So this takes us to the first category that we're looking at. We're looking at average MFP payments by race. So I will point you to the figure to the right. In this figure, we're looking at 3 years. So the blue column refers to the average payment in 2018. The red column refers to the average payment in 2019. And the green column refers to the average payment in 2020. What this is showing, for example, the red column for white only is showing the average payment that white only farms. And what I mean by white only, it means that every operator out of the 4 operators that ARMS asked about reports a race of white. So this is a farm that only includes white operators. So in 2019, white only farms, or farms with only white operators, received an average of $4,500 US for payment in MFP. And this chart includes everyone who reported not getting any MFP payments. They reported a payment of 0. So it includes everyone from 0 to positive amounts of MFP. As we can see here, the differences between white-only farms and black-only farms, and I will state the definition of black-only as a farm that only has black operators. It's quite large. And similarly to, if we compare white only to American Indian and Alaska Native only, as well as Asian only, the differences in these payments is quite large. So here we are pulling together all the 3 years, and the difficulty with looking at MFP payments in ARMS is that ARMS asked the question of how much in MFP payments did you receive in, for example, 2018 or 2019. But we don't know whether that corresponds to the MFP payments in the first round, so MFP 1 or MFP 2. So everything that the farm reports getting in 2019, it could be the second round of MFP, but it could also include a portion of the 2018 payments, because MFP payment schedule for the 2018 set, it could have happened in 2019. And then that's also why there's data for 2020. Despite there not being MFP 2020, there were payments that were that were supposed to be part of the 2019 round that happened in 2020. So if we pull the average across all these 3 years of data, and only look at the conditional payments. And what I mean by conditional is payments that were greater than 0. That means people that reported getting a positive amount of MFP. We see that the differences between white only, black only, American Indian, and Alaska Native, and Asian persist. And I point you to the figure in the left, where the white only farms received about $25,000 in MFP payments, on average, compared to $15,000 for Black-only farms. Similarly, American Indians also received less, looking at $20,000, and Asian only, it was about $8,000 in payments. So what is the potential driver of these differences in payments? So it is helpful to remember that MFP payments were calculated using formulas that in MFP1 included production and in MFP2 included acres. So here we're just doing a quick comparison between white-only and black-only farms. So I point you to the table on the left. So we have two columns, one looking at operated acres and the other one looking at harvested acres. These are the only types of acres that we can get in ARMS. Unfortunately, we don't have information on planted acres, which was exactly what was used for MFP. And the differences between white-only and black-only farm are substantial. So white-only farms across the 3 years of data had a total operated acres of 408 versus black-only farm, it was 108. So that can lead to a difference of that we're observing in MFP payments. So larger farms tend to receive more of the payments if the acreage and production was used as part of the formula to give MFP payments. Another potential reason that we could see these differences is commodity specializations, right? So some farms received, especially in 2018, when there were commodity specific rates, if you were producing soybeans only, you were more likely to receive a higher payment than a farm who specialized in looking at specialty crops or beef, for example. And from this sample, we know that across these 3 years of data, 40% of white-only farms specialized in cash grain and other field crops, which tend to receive the majority of the MFP payments. So 95% of MFP went to farms who specialized in these type of production, and that compares to only 21% of Black-only farms in the weighted sample that we have focused on those productions. And then 70% of Black-only farms specialize in beef production, which according to the GAO report in 2020 did not receive as much or any large percentage of MFP payments. So about 95% went to cash and grain crops, 4% went to dairy and hog production, and 1%, or around probably less than 1%, went to specialty crops. So this sort of gives you an idea that the story is not necessarily just the numbers and those differences. What really driving these differences, it's truly the way the formulas were calculated and what we're inputting into who we think should get more money. And if it's based on production and farm size, we will continue to see differences in the size of these payments across different categories. So it is a similar story when we look at payments by gender. Men-only farms, which refers to the 4 operators that ARMS asked in the survey to be male operators, and women-only farms refers to farms where all the women in the farm are female operators. We see these differences as well, looking specifically at the people that reported getting MFP payments. So we're looking at panel B in the figure to my left. The differences exist across all 3 years. So where men-only farms tend to receive a largest payment. And the largest difference between these two groups happened in 2018. So once again, looking at farm size and how that could have impacted the payments, we see that men-only farms tend to be about 3 times women-only farms in terms of total operated acres. And once again, I point you to the table to my right, looking at farm acres by gender from 2018 to 2020. I will also like to point out that male-only farms tend to specialize in cash, grain, and other field crops and dairy compared to a higher percentage than women-only farms. Looking at beginner farmers, and beginner farmer it refers to producers who have no more than 10 years of farming experience. We see that there's differences between beginner farms and other farms, but these are actually smaller compared to the previous groups that we're seeing. And in fact, in 2020, beginner farmers report a weighted average higher than other farms. And I point you where I'm seeing this exactly is in panel B to farms that reported having a positive MFP payment. And then lastly, limited resource farm. And the definition of a limited resource farm, for those that are not familiar with it, it refers to having gross farm sales under 180,000 and whose principal and operator was below and household income was below the poverty line or less than half of the county median income for 2 consecutive years. And limited resource farms receive the least amount of payments compared to other farms. And even when looking at minority farms or women-only farms, limited resource farms receive the least. And it goes back to the production, as it was mentioned in the last presentation, when you're looking at smaller farms and minority farms and those with limited resource, their production capacity is less. And if payments are based on production and acreage, we would see less payments going to those farms. So I will point you now to the conclusion. The preliminary results of this study suggest that there are differences, and to truly understand what's driving those differences, we need to do further analysis. But some of the things that are interesting thus far is that the weighted average of 2 white-only farms was higher than to any other minority only farm. And as we can see, some of these differences could be explained by the way MFP was calculated, and where there are differences in size and specialization, those will carry on to MFP if payments are made using farm size as a focus. So I would like to thank you all for your time. Any additional comments and questions, of course, you can ask them here, but this is my email address, Samantha Padilla at USDA.gov. And I will also like to invite you to like, share, and follow ERS. We have several media platforms and share lots of interesting information on U.S. agriculture. And there are many reports in our website that look at socially disadvantaged farmers, beginner farmers. And if this is a topic that interests you, I invite you to join us on social media. We also have an app that gives you a daily chart of notes on different topics regarding anything from production to trade, and it's often shared as well in our social media. So thank you so much for your time, and with this, I yield to Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Sam. So our next presenter is Eugene.
Okay, so this research tries to look at the transition incentive program and women farmers in the United States. So basically, what you're trying to do, there was this program that was introduced in the United States, I think in 2008, that tried to transition CRP lands, that is CRP lands are conservation reserve program lands, to beginning farmers and farmers that are socially disadvantaged. So basically, we are trying to see if this policy or this program has yielded its expected results over the years, right? So this is the overview of this presentation. So I'll basically look at the introduction and why we remain farmers, and you will give a brief description of the program, and I'll give a brief description of the program and the kind of methods that we used, and we'll give our major findings. So sorry. This farm farm programs have been introduced in the United States for various reasons. Like we have the CRP that was introduced in 1986, and we have the TIP, right? And over the years, there have also been other programs that have been introduced to help marginalized farmers. Like there are a lot of financial programs, a lot of land transfer programs and stuff like that have been introduced over the years to help various farm groups. But there's a lot of limited research when it comes to this group of founders of women, right? And we all know women form an integral part of the farming community in the United States, and having a lot of limited research on women is not something that's very good for academia and for also for the USDA. So as part of our research just fits into the broader perspective of looking at the impact of this transition program. This is just a subsection of our research. So the broader research looks at beginning farmers as well, but we are presenting the one on women because that is what we feel is more pertinent because of the limited scope of research around this area. So now the question is, why do we care about why women farmers? And there's a lot of literature on women, but when it comes to like case studies and stuff like that, right? And women are the fastest growing demographic group among all the socially disadvantaged farmers, right? And also, women have been known to own farms over the years, but there's a lot of issues when it comes to transfer of farms from women group to other marginalized women who are trying to enter into farming, and there's some kind of limited research on them. And women, as Cesar Escalante stated, are very constrained when it comes to accessing loans for their farming activities, right? And because farmers don't see women as like banks are not very comfortable giving loans to women to enter into farming. And also, one interesting thing about women is that women are environmentally astute, right? When they enter into farming, because they are more environmentally friendly, they use very sustainable practices compared to men who are more income induced. And also, women are also able to create some kind of niche for themselves, and they more or less go into organic farming, like these specialty crop productions and stuff like that. So we felt that this project or this research is more tailored against for women because the TIP, that is the Transition Incentive Program, right, is a subset of the Conservation Reserve Program, right, that tries to lease CRP lands to beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers. For maybe, the CRP is a land program that lasts about 12 to 15 years, right? And what the CRP does is that when this CRP lands about 3 to 5 years from the expiration date, the original landowner of the CRP land can decide to go into an agreement with a beginning farmer, right, who is not a relative and who has no family ties with this socially disadvantaged farmer. And what they do is that they go into an agreement with some kind of support from the USDA. And what they do is they lease these lands to these beginning farmers or these women farmers for them to use for their agricultural production. And in doing so, they are supposed to maintain all the conservation practices that are established on the conservation land, right? So in as much as they are trying to use these lands to support their agricultural production, they are also supposed to maintain all these conservation practices. They are supposed to maintain best management practices as well. And sometimes they're not even supposed to use fertilizers in maybe inorganic fertilizers in their production. That is what we call the organic certifications and stuff like that. So we believe women, as the literature says, they are more climate friendly and stuff like that. We believe they are this group of farmers who will be more willing to enter into this kind of programs. So basically, really, so I think I've explained the transition incentive program. Right? So this is a slide on it, and I would like to just repeat it again. So the original landowner, so this is how the compensation works. The original landowner in the actual CRP receives a compensation payment for leasing his land into the conservation program for that's about the 12 to 15 years, right? And if he decides to enter into the TIP as well, he is given an additional compensation payments as well, together with together with the original payment that he's receiving from the CRP. So basically, the original landowner is kind of benefiting because he receives a compensation payment from the CRP. That's the first agreement, and he gets another payment where if he decides to give the land to a beginning farmer, right, or a woman farmer or socially disadvantaged farmer. And the benefit that the woman, like who wants to take this CRP land, is he gets an additional land to help with the farming and to boost their agricultural productivity and stuff like that. So what we decided to do was just try to see if this program is actually working and if this program is actually, especially women are taking advantage of this policy in trying to expand their farmlands and in trying so what we're trying to see is that is this program increasing entry of women into agriculture in the United States, right? So that is basically what we're trying to do. It is policy trying to increase entry because we didn't have data on the on women farmers, their farmland acreage. So we decided to use the number, probably to see if this program is quite effective, then it's driving entry, right? Yes. So there'll be less exit and more entry into farming if there's enough land to farm on. So that's our research objective. And how do we achieve this? So we use matching methods. We use various matching methods, like with the propensity score matching methods, to try to see if we can at least achieve. We can try to maybe achieve this average treatment effect on the treated, right? So we try to draw some causal inference, but we try to solve this kind of selection bias and indigeneity issues by trying to use this matching methods. And our main dependent variable was we try to use the share of women producers or women farmers as against the total operators in the county, right? And so we have two groups like counties that took part in this TIP against counties that didn't take part in this TIP. But sometimes we have selection biases and stuff like that, and that wouldn't allow us to be able to identify this causal inference. So we try to use these matching methods. And in our analysis, we use 3 different types of matchings. We have the kernel, we have the nearest neighbor, and we have the IPW, the inverse probability weighting method. And so, yes, so we employ this matching techniques, and for the nearest neighbor matching, we use the Malhanobi's distance approach to try to make sure our coverage match based on the distance using this distance approach. And we focus on the 2017 data sets because of the variations in the definition of who a woman farmer is, right? Based on the USDA definition of a woman farmer, this definition keeps changing all the time. So it's very difficult to kind of try to use maybe a repeated cross-sectional data or maybe a panel data. But in our analysis, we focus on county data. We had to use the Freedom of Act information, the Freedom of Information Act, to try to get counties that are actually enrolled in this program because of the inaccessibility of TIP data on the USDA website. So we focused on the base of 2017 data sets, and we also use a lot of like control variables to try to do this to save us covariates in our matching methods, right? So we have women farmers as the proportion of women farmers in the county, and we have the tip policy that is a dummy variable, and we have a lot of, and we have a vector of control variable that we try to use as a matching for our matching. So this is our study area. So now the question is, why do we focus on this study area? And we know the CRP is not evenly distributed in the country, right? We have certain parts of the states that don't really have CRP lands, and we have certain parts of the states that have CRP lands, but right, so it's very difficult to try to identify which areas will actually take up the tip policy because of the different CRP practices. Because if you go into the US South, you realize that most CRP lands are used for pine plantations and stuff like that. So it's very difficult to lease this land for a woman farmer or maybe a socially disadvantaged farmer, in the sense that there'll be a high conversion cost for converting the CRP land that has been used for timber purposes back into our agricultural land. So we realized that this kind of program wouldn't be quite feasible in the US South, right? So we didn't want to include areas in the US South, and our little digging into the information realized that states like Alabama, Mississippi haven't used any of their tip funds that have been allocated to them since the program started. So that means that most CRP land holders in this states are not really interested in this because most of their lands are into pine and stuff like that. So it wouldn't really isn't worthwhile to try to give this land to social disadvantaged farmer, because most of these lands are already changed forms from agricultural lands to timberlands. So we realized that for this program to be quite effective, then it's actually going to be quite effective in areas that have a lot of grassland or tillage practices. So we focus our region of study in the plains and in some part of the Midwest, where most of the lands are not actually used for what we call timber purposes, but rather used for maybe grassland conservation and maybe tillage and other conservation practices. So that is why you see the green section, where we focus our attention on those plains and the Midwest. Right. So we have our table, and our first table shows our descriptive statistics, and we have two groups of women farmers, right? So there are two groups of women farmers that we look at here. That is the female producers and the primary producers, right? And so these two groups of female operators are available. So we try to use all of them to try to see if maybe we are going to get maybe some consistent results or maybe some divergent results. And we use a lot of covariates that are highly correlated with the TIP program. We use the total cropland acreage in the county. We use growing degree days. We use real farm income. We use the household income. We calculated the crop price index. We use the farmland price and other soil characteristics and other demographic characteristics as well. And so we included too, like the soil pH, because the tip is more like land allocation, and land allocation is very, very highly correlated with the type of soil, because the land we use for agricultural purposes. So it's very important for us to look at the quality of the land in terms of its soil properties and stuff like that. So that's why you see all these soil characteristics in our analysis. And so we decided to also group our variables into the treatment and the control. And for our treatment, we have 309 counties in our control. We have about 1,000 controls, and we believe this is enough observations for us to be able to identify, or maybe for us to be able to determine if there is actually any positive impact, or maybe if the program is not yielding its expected results, right? So yeah, so we have these two groups, and our observations about 13,009 observation. So for us to be able to identify if our results is actually positive, or our results is actually true, we do what we call the matching. And for the unconditional difference, we realize that without matching, we wouldn't be able to say our results is actually what it is. So because you can see from the, I don't know, from where I'm sitting from the left, from my left, you can see that our groups are not homogeneous, because there's a lot of disparities across the two groups, right? And so in order for us to be able to say that, hey, our results are true and consistent and statistically correct, we try to create a homogeneous group, right? Trying to make sure we bring all the two groups at the same level. So, right, you can see that after matching, our standardized difference are very close to the zero mark, and that means that we did very good work while trying to adopt these matching methods. But I only present the nearest number matching approach over here, but there are other. The IPW is also yielded similar results as well, and I'll be willing to share those results if anybody is interested in them. And yeah, and this research has also been submitted for publication at the land use policy. It's under review. So yeah. So after performing our matching and estimating our average treatment effect on the treated, we realized that the policy is actually yielding some significant results, although it's small, but there's some kind of positive outcome within the policy, and we realized that the share of female producers increased about 0.013 relative to in tip counties relative to counties that do not have tip, and we see some kind of consistency as well within across the various matching methods that we use, also for the kernel matching and also for the IP inverse probability weighting. We see that our results are yielding this kind of consistent outcomes. So yeah, so in a nutshell, we realize that the tip policy is actually increasing the entry of women farmers in counties that are actually enrolling the program, right? And so this is the little discussion that we have. So we realize that the share of women producers or women farmers in counties that are enrolled in TIP is actually using the expected results, and based on the 2017 data set that we used, and a recent publication in the American Journal of Agricultural Economics, it came out, I think, last week or last 2 weeks, and it says that there has been an increase of women of organic farmers in areas that are high CRP lands and CRP land that are exiting, and it is quite very consistent with our results. And so anybody also who's interested in trying to know more about this organic certification and also how women are also responding to this kind of policies can also read our paper, because it gives a lot of insights in what is going on when it comes to organic farming. And this kind of research is very also important to us, because we realize most women move into this kind of specialty crop, that's organic farming and specialty crop production. And so we realize that it's very consistent with the kind of results that we had in our research. And for future research, we will try to explore the 2022 data sets. This work was started like a year, like last year, so we didn't have access to the 2022 census data, but now that has been released, we'll also try to combine it with our existing results to see if the results are both consistent and will also give us the expected outcomes. So yeah, so this is what I have for us concerning the effect of the transition incentive program on women farmers in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. That was great. So now we're going to transition to our fourth presenter, Clayton.
Thanks so much. All right, so good morning, everybody. My name is Clayton Winters-Michaud. I'm a ag economist at the USDA's Economic Research Service. Before I get started, I'll just do the quick disclaimer. Right, any finding and conclusions of this presentation are mine and not that of the USDA. All right, so today I'm going to be talking to you all about an important but kind of often overlooked ag equity issue known as heirs property. So before I get into what heirs property is from a technical definition, first I'll talk to you kind of about why it's important, why it matters, what it has to do with kind of the theme of this conference and session. So heirs property is this disadvantageous, unfavorable form of land ownership that disproportionately affects African American and other historically disadvantaged or underserved groups. And as a result, heirs property, the ruling is it inhibits the productive use of agricultural land. And that's the thing that me and my team are kind of focused on at the USDA, looking at this productive use of agricultural land. But as a result, it also inhibits the accumulation of generational wealth, rural development, while at the same time promoting racial and social inequalities and involuntary land loss. So heirs property has been recognized as one of, if not the leading cause of involuntary Black land loss. So now we kind of talk about what is heirs property. All right, so heirs property comes about when a landowner, say a farmer, dies without leaving a will. Right, so normally if they left a will, the property would go through probate, go through kind of the normal legal system. But since there wasn't a will, that's not what happened. So with property, right? So imagine that there's 4 heirs and $40,000, right? You would imagine, right? Obviously, each heir would get $10,000, but that's not what happens in the case of real property. What happens is each of those 4 heirs would essentially get a 25% stake in the whole 40 acres. So say there was 40 acres, right? They wouldn't each get 10 acres. They would get a 25% stake in the whole 40 acres. All right, and so there's kind of 2 things that result from this, from this outcome. So the first is, since it didn't go through probate, the name on the title is the name of the deceased individual. So even though the heirs own the property, right, the deceased individual's name is still on the title. So you have this issue referred to as a clouded title. And so some problems associated with this clouded title issue is that this land can't be used as collateral to, say, get a loan from the bank, right? So it makes it very hard to access credit, makes it hard to invest in this land, particularly if it's farmland, right, to invest in it to make it productive. And at the same time, this clouded title means that historically, it's been difficult to access USDA programs. So commodity payment programs, disaster relief, crop insurance, conservation programs, things like that. And so when this happens, the system, right, by not going through probate, essentially the term is intestate, it enters this kind of limbo, and the heirs become what's known as tenants in common. The property becomes what would be referred to as tenancy in common, would be like the technical name for the land tenure type. And so under laws of tenancy in common, there are all these stipulations for how the land has to be managed, right? And so one of them is that the land management decisions require the unanimous consent of all the heirs. And so this heirs property issue, I haven't mentioned this, but it can persist over generations, right? This might be land that was inherited, say, after the Civil War, right? And it's been passed down from generation to generation, right, throughout this family, but without any actual, formal legal process. And so there might be, dozens of heirs who all have a claim to this property, all have an interest in this property, And some of them might not even know that they have an interest, right? The family might not be connected to some of those. So first of all, just getting everyone, even if you knew everyone, it would probably be hard to get everyone to agree on what you want to do with the land. And often it's not even possible. Another stipulation is that the proceeds need to be shared regardless of who contributes. So let's just say, going back to our example where there's 4 heirs, say 3 of them want to buy a tractor to, harvest more corn, one of them doesn't. Well, if the 3 just decide to go forward and buy that tractor, well, they have to share, all the benefits essentially of having that tractor with the heir that didn't want to contribute, and that also applies to things like property taxes. And then lastly, there's this threat of involuntary land loss via forced sale, which are kind of brought up in the last one. So essentially, the way that the law works is if any one of these tenants in common wants to sell the land, they can essentially petition the court. The court will do a forced partition sale where they'll, rather than dividing the property up, they'll sell the entire property, cash auction on the courthouse steps sort of thing. And so the fear, or the kind of the anecdotal story, is that a developer or a speculator can come in, buy a really fractional interest from one of these heirs who might just have, let's say a 5% interest, right? They buy that interest out from that single heir, making them one of the tenants in common, and then they can then force the sale of the land and buy the land out from under the historic heirs, right? And so all of these kind of disincentive or challenges, barriers, all kind of coalesce to presumably, right, make it much harder to use this land productively for agriculture. So that's the heirs property problem. All right, so now let's talk about maybe some more, look on the brighter side, and we'll talk about some recent policy reforms that have been put in place to address these challenges. So the first one is known as the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. Despite its name, it's not a federal law. It's essentially a model statute that states can adopt, right? And so it's initially focused on this involuntary land loss issue, right? And so at its core, it's a set of like simple due process restrictions, protections, so to make sure that to limit the possibility of these heirs involuntarily losing their land, and if in the end the property is sold, it makes sure that all of the proceeds are fairly distributed and that they're getting an actual market value and all of those things. And so I believe the first state passed it. One state passed it back in 2011. Now it's been passed by 22 states plus DC and the Virgin Islands, and is introduced in 6 more. But some other important things that it does is it provides a legal definition of heirs property, which I don't have time to go into, but you'll see why that's important in one of the next slides. And then it also works hand in hand with the 2018 Farm Bill. So around 2018, Congress wanted to kind of strengthen the effectiveness of the UPHPA, get more states to adopt it. So they did this using the Farm Bill, 2018 Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill has 2 new provisions for heirs property. So the first one was it established new procedures that made it easier for heirs properties to qualify for a farm number. And it gave extra preferential treatment for farmers in states that have adopted the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. So remember, we said before, historically, it's been difficult accessing this USDA programs, right? So now they have these new procedures that make it easier to get a farm number, and a farm number is the thing that you need to apply for these programs. And then they also created or authorized the heirs property real-ending program, which will provide over $100 million to help heirs resolve their title issues. And again, that also prioritizes the UPHPA states, right, as an incentive for more states to adopt the act. So here's just quickly the new rules that make it easier for operators on heirs property to get a farm number and apply for USDA programs. So on the left here are just the rules for in states that have adopted the UPHPA, right? So bolded there, the bolded bullet on the left. And so all you need is a court order verifying the land meets the definition of heirs property as defined by the UPHPA, right? So that was what I was saying, right? We're just having this definition is actually really important because then you can actually, get a court order saying this meets this definition. And so those are for states that have adopted the act, right? Because that's how they have a legal definition. But even in states that have not adopted the Uniform Petition of Heirs Property Act, the new, verification process, right? You can just have a self-certification that the individual has control of the land for purposes of operating a farm or ranch. So you can see it's much easier now for these heirs to obtain a USDA farm number. And then we also have the heirs property relending program, which is a little different from some other USDA programs that give out money directly. This one works with intermediary lenders, what are often referred to as community development funds, CDF. And so the way this program works is, first the lenders apply to the USDA, to the Farm Service Agency, right? And they select the lenders. And then these lenders give out loans to these heirs at these subsidized 1% interest rates, right? And then these loans can be used by the heirs to resolve title issues. So it could be that, all the heirs together take out a loan, resolve the title issue, start, some business structure together, or it could be that a single individual buys out the interest of the other heirs, consolidates the property, right? Or it could be any combination. It could be two brothers who do it, right? And so either way, resolve the title issue and then set up a succession plan for the property so that it doesn't become heirs property again, right? And then as a result of this, right, the heirs will obtain the legal title, then they'll be able to apply for USDA programs. They'll be able to get credit from the bank. They won't have this tenancy in common provisions hanging over their head. All right, so that's the kind of policy review. And now quickly, I'll just talk about two different studies that my team and I have been doing at the Economic Research Service, looking at different issues related to heirs property. So this first one, all right, we talked about how heirs property inhibits the productive use of land, and that's kind of, a fairly obvious inference, right, from all these challenges, right? But we don't necessarily have or haven't had quantitative evidence really saying, it's this much harder or whatnot. So what we want to do, we did in this first study is we're looking at how is the land on heirs property used, and then how does that compare to how land on other property is used, right? So kind of broader population of say, private property, to see if there's key differences between, how heirs property is being used. So we have real estate data. We had a fancy algorithm that identifies, likely heirs property in this real estate data, right? Using different keywords or combinations of characteristics that only heirs property would be likely to have. So we identify these heirs property parcels in this real estate database. We use the geo coordinates to match them up with satellite data that provides land cover data, right? So then we classify each of our candidate heirs properties as a certain type of land use, right? And then we compare that distribution of land use to the broader population. So quickly, I won't spend too much time on this table here, but so in this study, I didn't say we're looking just at the South, just at the 7 states listed there in the notes. That tends to be where the biggest concentration of heirs property is, kind of around that Black Belt area. So these are the summary stats, but don't want to spend too much time. So first on the right, the blue box on the right under total, right? So we found over 160,000 heirs properties. On average, they were about 18 acres in size. There was covered about 3 million acres, and that ended up being just over 1.5% of the non-federal land base of those 7 states of the South. And then just quickly looking at the blue box on the left. So we broke them up. So like I said, we're classifying them into different land use. So cropland, right? That's a farm, pasture, that's a ranch, forest is forest. Developed, that's a house or some building, right? And then other rural is neither of those four things, right? There's not trees, there's not crops, there's not animals, there's not houses. But if we just look, so 32.4 acres, right? That's the average size essentially of an heirs property farm. So just looking at those numbers, we can see they're much smaller than what we think of as traditional commercial farms, right? Kind of going along with our intuition. So here's a pie chart of those four land use categories. You can see, so the majority of it is forest land, probably not too surprising, especially if it's hard to use the land, right? You can overgrow into forest. Right, about 8% was pasture land, 14% was cropland, 11% was developed, and then we have this big chunk here that's almost a quarter, almost 25%. That's this other rural land, so not being used for crops, not being used for ranching, not being used for timber production, or not being used to grow trees, and also, doesn't have anything built on it. So the important thing, like I said, we want to do is we want to compare this to the general population. So I guess starting with the purple slice and going counterclockwise, right? Developed, both around 11%, cropland, both around 14%, pasture land, right? A little less common on the heirs property, forest land, a little less common on the heirs property. But the big takeaway here, right, is this huge difference between the size of this red wedge. So on, our normal non-federal land, right? Less than 5% of land is not any of those other things, right? It's just some sort of other unused state. With the heirs property, right, we get almost a quarter, like I said, so 5 times more likely. So we're taking that as, as supporting this idea that it's much harder to productively use heirs property, right? And that this represents the difference between, essentially heirs property that could be being used for agricultural production, could be helping those families accumulate generational wealth, could be providing jobs for the community, could be increasing land values and providing money for taxes for schools, all those things, right? That's the difference is kind of that's the impact of these restrictions on heirs property. And so just quickly jumping to the second study, I only have one more slide. So in this one, instead of looking at kind of a snapshot, we're going to compare. We're going to use our real estate data, but we're going to have 2015 and 2021 data. So we have 2 points in time, 6 years apart. And we're going to look at properties that we know are heirs property. So in the first one, we kind of were inferring based on, this fancy algorithm that we had. This one, it does have ones that are marked specifically as heirs properties. We know there are some that aren't marked. So we have this sample, but it's the same sample over time. So we're not going to report absolute values. We're just going to look at percent changes, right? Because we don't know how much heirs property was created between those 2 years, but we know what percentage of it is new. Okay, so final figure here. So this is called a Sankey graph, and it's showing the transition of properties from 2015 on the left to 2021. So it's showing how much of heirs property, how many properties were heirs property in 2015, and we're still heirs property in 2021. That's that, top flat bar. And then it's also showing of the heirs property, of the property that was heirs in 2015, how much of it was no longer heirs in 2021. That's the leaving HP, that 36%. And then vice versa, right? Properties that were not heirs in 2015, but were in 2021. All right, so focusing on this 98.9 under the heirs property on the right. So what that's saying is that in 2021, there was 98.9% as much heirs property as there was in 2015, right? So the total amount of heirs property decreased by just over 1%. So not that big of a change, right? A small decrease, but not too substantial. However, if you were to just look at that number, it masks these huge transitions, very unexpected transitions in and out of heirs property, right? So what we see here is that of the heirs property in 2015, 36%, so more than a third of it, was no longer heirs property in 2021. So it had been resolved somehow, right? Either they had resolved they'd resolved it themselves, the property had been sold, whatever was the case. It was no longer heirs property 6 years later. But perhaps even more interestingly, of the heirs property in 2021, 35% of it, 34.9, had not been heirs property 6 years earlier, right? So we tend to think of heirs property as being this historic, lingering problem, right? But as we can see here, a third of the current heirs property had been created in the recent past, right? In the last 6 years, had not been heirs property prior to that. Okay, so that's kind of my last official slide. I'll jump to the ERS links there, but just in conclusion, so heirs property, it's important. It does have an impact, as we've shown, and it's not going away, as we've also shown. All right, so thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions at the end.
All right, thank you for that, Clayton, and thank you all four presenters for these great presentations and thinking about a pretty diverse range of different topics. So we're about out of time, so I'm just going to sort of sum up the questions with just sort of one question that anyone can take if you're interested. How might your results capture or sort of be affected by the relationship between sort of farmer demographics and farm characteristics, right? So a couple of the presentations have mentioned like sort of these correlations. I think Clayton just mentioned, right? Like a lot of the heirs property issues are kind of concentrated in the South, right? So there are sort of these farmer demographics that relate very closely with some certain farm geography characteristics. So can any of you speak to that issue about how it might affect your results or how your results might capture that?
I actually have some results on regional differentiation, different results for different regions. And one of the dominant trends was that the South, farms in the South are typically smaller and they receive smaller loans. And then they actually have some, compared to farms in the Midwest who actually receive more favorable loan terms than the farms in the South because of all these differences in their financial indicators. I just didn't have time to include that, but it's actually in my appendix. I would be happy to share it with anybody who's interested.
Okay, great.
Well, let me say our research focused mainly on the Midwest and the Plains because of the uneven distribution of conservation lands in the United States, right? Because and these two programs basically are just for CRP land transitions for women to have the opportunity to farm. So if we decide to focus on the South, these policies are not effective in the South because of the conservation practices that takes place down there. So there's no way we can do this kind of regional analysis. So we decided to focus just on the Midwest and then in the Plains. But what we can further do is try to see maybe Midwest against the Plains to see how they vary. But we've not actually done that. We try to lump the Midwest and the Plains into one region. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all again for your presentations. And I think we are just out of time, so we'll stop there. I would encourage you all to join us for the lunch break in the networking lounge on the conference website. And then following lunch, session 2 will sort of continue this theme on diversity and participation in government programs. So thank you again to all of our speakers and to everyone for attending.